Screening review, La Grande Illusion. One of the most cherished films of all time, screening on 2 dates at a cinema in Sydney. I couldn't pass that up. It is a film which I remember thinking utterly lived up to the esteemed status it has held for nearly a century now. For me, this was certainly one of the most affecting, impressive, and enchanting films I'd ever viewed. And I feel this way again, having seen it again at that cinema on the Saturday of last week. Actually, at the end of the screening, I felt that is the greatest film of all time. I'm not saying it is, but it gave me that feeling, which is certainly a reasonable criteria to name it either one of the greatest films of all time or, if nothing else, one of my favourite films of all time. Some things to note about La Grande Illusion. 1. It occasionally will skip over events in the plot, or not display them to the viewer, to be more specific. And whilst this does not break any immersion into the film, it is a striking attribute which most films now would never dare to consider. The most glaring example, we never see our two protagonists shot down before they first become prisoners of the German military. Now, it was not out of the ordinary for this to occur in novels, to this day even, or in the theatre, and so when a film did this in 1937, I don't think audiences would have objected too much to this if it were used in the narrative of a feature. I also believe at one point one of the camp commanders is referring to escapes which were attempted by these protagonists, which may have occurred off-screen between scenes, although maybe I misunderstood this and it occurred prior to the commencement of the film's runtime at all. 2. Stroheim here portrays one of the greatest characters in film history, especially up to this point in time. Rarely am I more moved by an actor's performance in any picture. Stroheim is on a small list of directors who are one of the greatest auteurs and actors of all time, including Orson Welles, Charlie Chaplin, Takashi Kitano, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, and John Cassavetes. The screenplay would have read as one of the most "let's make this now" in film history. The greatest directed film arguably up to that point in time, close to being the greatest film ever made upon its year of release. Actually, I consider this the greater film to 1939's The Rules of the Game, which I think is a stellar picture. But to me, this is Renoir's greatest contribution to the medium, to our species, and to this day, quite plausibly my favourite, or one of my 3 favourite films of the 1930s. Amazing to think. The French is a filmmaking nation, making films for their own audiences, attempting to accomplish the be-all end-all of narrative filmmaking, without any care whether any English-language critics or audiences is going to get much out of it, not adhering to their corresponding traditions, because all nations' filmmaking traditions were so young at that point, rather than the homogenizing, globalizing culture which all-world cinema tends to at least vaguely adhere to now. La Grande Illusion is French in every respect, not an art house take on another nation's films, as we could say of some of Japan's post-war auteurs in being inspired by films from America or Europe, not an ethereal convergence of minds as the films of West Germany, the Soviet Union, Poland, and Spain appeared to strive for in the 60s and 70s, and not an appeal to social realism with the metatextual deconstructive traits of certain Nouvelle Vague works, as we could say of some of Iran's still immensely brilliant auteurs of the early to mid-90s, Kiarostami, Makhmalbaf, or Naderi maybe. Certainly Naderi later, as in 2011's riveting Exercise Cut, in terms of the more deconstructive sort of material, I mean, with no immediate influences, La Grande Illusion was an apotheosis of French cinema specifically, through and remains one of the most culturally distinct films or eras ever to exist in all of film history. French cinema from its inception and up until, I would say, the 1970s, the Nouvelle Vague and its excitingly confused aftermath, before the more commercial cynicism of the 80s decayed world cinema in many corners of the then developed world. I have to be honest, a level of cultural pride and confidence is missing in the modern world. It is seen as too tribalistic or traditionalist, and France is now apparently taken with deconstructing all it can and dismantling the concept of patriotism as an oppressive system which must be dissolved, which could be as patriotic as it gets for France, considering their ultimate moment of popular history is that little revolution. Although I say this as someone who might be considered rather far in the left with my politics, I think a rich cultural congruence and more contemporary progressive values can quite smoothly coexist, and I'm confused that some of the left is not able to hold a nuanced, non-binary view on this notion, really. A major critics classic of world cinema, which I think most audiences, most of my dad's generation at least, could sit down and watch, finish it thinking, that was a good movie. Was this the first major prisoner of war or prison escape movie to influence lauded critical and popular, or both, works such as A Man Escaped or Le Trot from Becker, in English The Hole, an utterly brilliant film which I once showed to my father, a fan of the next films I will mention, and he just loved it? Or the notable Hollywood favourites The Great Escape or the decades later Shawshank Redemption. Not a real favourite of mine, but a widely seen film, and prospectively of that tradition which potentially began with Renoir and Le Grande Illusion. If you don't see the hype as a younger film fan, I don't know what to tell you. But if I made this and you didn't see the hype, I would know what to tell you. Even if it was just an emotional, bitter demand that you never watch films again, you aren't worthy of it. Even if I wasn't aware of the hype, I would be thinking, is it just me? Or is something magical going on here? Well, many critics felt the same way, many filmmakers felt this way, 19-year-old AOD felt this way, and 29-year-old AOD still incredibly thoroughly feels this way too.